And then Emily, thank you again for doing this for us, and I'll turn it over to you to have you introduce yourself and take it from there.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to, be speaking to everyone. So my name's Emily. I'm from DQM and I'm the Director of Solution Development. And I also am doing our monthly webinars that we host once a month. And so today we're going to be talking about the key factors to a successful DQ file management strategy and kind of diving into what companies who are successful with their safety and compliance, what they're doing, some of the features and technology that they are using, and also just the habits that they're forming to continue that safety and compliance initiative. So, little quick background just about VLC and DQM as a company. So, VLC, we're actually celebrating 25 years of compliance this year. Super exciting. We are well known for our workflow and compliance management for the trucking industry. So anything from IRP, IFTA, driver files, ELDs, we do it all. So we really have been helping the industry for 25 years with their compliance and safety initiatives. So I just want to go over a couple things. If you are watching the news, if you're on some, forums, I'm sure you've seen all of the buzz about what's going on with drivers, specifically with the FMCSA. There has been a shift, I think, towards more focus on driver compliance and driver safety over the past few years with the FMCSA. Historically, it's been more about like fleets and hours of service and stuff like that. But there's recently been this change, and it kind of started with the clearinghouse situation. What, 5 years ago now, I think, is when that started. But FMCSA is really starting to crack down on that. So one of them is that English language proficiency. We are, seeing people getting out of service for not having English language proficient drivers behind the wheel. The whole medical card change, going digital on that, that's been extended a couple times. January 10th is the new deadline. We'll see if states are ready to push that, move that forward. Hopefully, it's not the same disaster that we saw with the clearinghouse 5 years ago. I don't know if any of you felt that pain, but we'll see how that changes. The non-domiciled drivers, California is in some hot water right now. Well, all the states are, but California is really being made an example of the non-domiciled CDLs. There is a temporary stay on that right now because the courts deemed that the way that the regulation came into effect was not lawful. But that doesn't mean that that's not going to be put into effect here soon. And then the proposed change of fentanyl added to drug testing. Some less recent changes is the clearinghouse, right? Make sure you're doing your polls, your annuals, and pre-employment. And then also the violation certificate, not having to have a physical violation certificate on file, but you still need to make sure that you're doing your annual reviews with your drivers. So one other thing why this is important is the drivers are the face of your company. At the end of the day, they're on the road. They're the ones pulling the cargo. They're the ones who are going to be have a higher chance of being in a risky situation. Your driver behavior affects your safety and risk. That can affect your insurance premiums, and that can also affect your CSA scores, right? So we want to make sure that we're on track with our driver compliance. And normally, if you're handling your compliance well, it kind of shows in your safety scores. Real quick, just overview of, driver file compliance. This is kind of the minimum onboarding requirements. DOT application, make sure you're doing that. I'll go over the DOT application in a second. Pre-employment drug and alcohol testing, clearinghouse query, road test or equivalent, right? It's not regulated for you to do a road test if you have a CDL, but we always recommend doing it. It takes 10-15 minutes to make sure that that driver who's getting behind the wheel for you is able to operate that $200,000 unit. Motor vehicle record, that's a big one. We want to make sure we're running that pre-employment, getting them behind the wheel. Your safety verifications, and then drug and alcohol questionnaire to make sure that they're not in the middle of a return to duty process that you're not aware of. So I wanted to take a second and talk about the DOT application in particular, because this is an area that over the years working with companies that we tend to see a little bit of a gap. And it's mostly because the DOT application just asks for a lot more information than like a normal HR system would ask for. And sometimes there's a disconnect between safety and your HR team, right? They live in two different worlds. HR has their own rules and regulations that they need to follow, make sure that they're not messing up any labor laws. And then safety also has to make sure that they're in line with DOT regulations. So you can kind of see a comparison of typically what we see on a normal application versus a DOT application. And you can see that there's a lot of gaps here. Some companies have built out an HR or built out a DOT application in their HR system, but there still tends to be some gaps in there just because, again, HR has their own set of rules that they need to know and follow, and safety has a different set of rules. Your ongoing management, make sure you're doing your annual MVRs, your annual violation certificate, or your driver review, whichever you want to take, whatever route you want to take. Just make sure that you're verifying those violations with your driver. You want to keep up on medical cards. The last thing you need is a medical card expiring, you're not tracking it, and your driver is out on the road and they get pulled over and now they are out of service. Driver's license, I think that's a pretty obvious one. They need to have a driver's license that's valid and not expired. Any additional certificates, if you operate at the ports, make sure their TWIC cards are up to date, hazmat, TSA, your annual clearinghouse query, and then also make sure you're part of that random drug and alcohol testing and you're meeting the requirements for the random percentages that are needed for you. So what are the consequences of noncompliance? I think most people know that you can get fined, right? That's a big one. If you're caught with noncompliance with your driver files or any type of inspection, you can be fined. You also can get a risk of out of service, which I would argue is worse than a fine because now your driver's parked on the side of the road with cargo. And it's the impact on your CSA score. More inspections, higher risk rating. If you're going through a scale, you can't utilize technology to bypass a scale if your CSA score is unfavorable. You have a higher chance of getting pulled over when your CSA scores are unfavorable. There's just a lot of things that kind of snowball through your CSA scores. Operational consequences, high driver turnover. I don't know about you, but I don't like getting pulled over, and I don't think any driver who is operating wants to get pulled over either. It's just not a good experience. So if you have a target on your back because your CSA scores are unfavorable, your drivers get pulled over more. It's just not a fun experience. They want to drive, right? They don't want to be sitting on the side of the road trying to pull up their logbooks to show to a DOT officer. Also just a higher risk. If compliance and safety go hand in hand. Typically, if your compliance, you're not doing your annual checks, you're not doing your pre-employment onboarding due diligence, that tends to leave some gaps for higher risk and accidents, citations, verdicts, lawsuits, stuff like that. Overall, higher operational costs. So drivers who tend to be in risky behaviors, speeding, running red lights, that's an obvious one, but mostly speeding, idling when not needing to. It's higher fuel prices to you, just overall wear and tear on the vehicles. There's a lot more operational costs with drivers who are performing risky behavior. And then increased insurance premiums. A lot of insurance companies ask for MVRs once a year. If they see that your drivers are consistently operating with risky behavior, they can increase your insurance premiums. So what are the habits of successful DQ file management? I have 6 up on the screen here, and we're going to go ahead and run through all 6 a little bit more in depth. So the first one is consistency with onboarding. We want compliance from day one, right? If we don't set the tone from day one of non-compliance, or we set the tone of non-compliance, that's probably not going to follow for the rest of the driver life cycle. So we want to standardize our application process. Why? So everyone is on the same page. There's less room for errors and gaps. We want to ensure that the required documents are collected up front. Why? Because that helps with shorter onboarding time and less loss of drivers. If you can reduce the back and forth between your driver, you can get them on the road quicker, and you may potentially not lose that driver to a different company because they're behind the wheel in a couple days and they're not looking and talking to other companies. Use guided compliant applications to reduce errors. Why? Because anyone can do it. That is the big thing. If you have a workflow and you have a system that guides you through your compliance and anyone can do it, then there's less room for error. There's less room for things to get missed. There's less room for someone to fat finger something and type in an expiration date incorrectly. There's just less room for individuals to skip a step. We want to track our renewals proactively, and the keyword here is proactively. So automate reminders to drivers and admin, driver credentials, MVR, annual MVRs, your annual clearinghouse reminders. We want to create less manual work so you don't miss a reminder. Outlook calendar reminders, having to manually reset those, probably not a good way to track renewals, especially if you have meetings all day and you get a lot of notifications and you accidentally clear it out, then you've missed that notification. Similar with managing on Excel spreadsheets, which is kind of like my next point here. No more spreadsheets and no more calendar reminders. You need one source of truth. As soon as you open up an Excel spreadsheet, it's out to date. As soon as you export something, it's out to date. So you want to be using a system, one source of truth, where multiple people have access, and it is the most up-to-date current information for your renewals. Open and centralized communication between departments, safety, HR, dispatch, and driver. These are kind of the big ones that it's going to matter. They're going to need to know when a driver has a renewal coming up or their license is expired. You want all your departments to be cohesive. The responsibility is shared at the end of the day. So again, going back to that one source of truth, not having to manage an Excel spreadsheet on a server or something like that is really beneficial and a good habit to have. And doing your annual reviews and your periodic training. So we encourage, you want to pull your annual MVRs and conduct driver performance reviews. That's a compliance thing. But we do encourage looking into continuous monitoring if you do not already have it. The reason is that you're meeting your DOT requirement. That's awesome. You're pulling it once a year, but it's also a risk touch base and a continuous risk touch base. So, for example, if you had a driver going back to that medical card expiring, you have a driver who had a medical card expired over the weekend. They never got it renewed. Now their license has been downgraded. How do you know that until you pull that MVR manually again? You're not going to know. And now you've dispatched that driver onto the road. That's a big gap. That's a big visibility gap there. You also want to compare your violations with your CSA scores. So if you're not tracking your accident registry or your violations, you should be doing that. But you want to compare to your CSA scores because there's a ton of use cases out there that show that CSA can put an incident on your record twice. or they mistype it and that incident never happened with your DOT. And your CSA score is important. So if you're not comparing, if you're not reviewing that, quarterly, and you're not doing the data queues, that could, affect your overall operational efficiency. Be very clear that you're consortium or that you're in a random program of some sort, right? It's a DOT standard, but it's also a risk check-in. So the randoms are there for a reason. And just make sure that you are very clear that you are, one, your drivers are enrolled in a random program, and two, whoever you're utilizing for your randoms is reaching out and following the steps that they need to, so that during an audit, you're showing that they are part of the random, they just didn't get selected or did get selected or what have you. House all your incidents in one place. Accidents, citations, driver behavior, both good and bad. We want to track both. Drug and alcohol events and training. This is going to make annual reviews easier, training programs, making sure that people are doing trainings, they're completed trainings, and behavior influences. So you can see at a driver level, this driver is getting into a risky, they've ran a stop sign 4 times in the last month. And you need some way to house all that information that you've done training. You've done everything that you need to do to try to rehabilitate this driver before either pulling them off the road permanently or, trying to rehabilitate them further. But you want to keep it all in one place. Again, Excel, once you open up that Excel spreadsheet, it's no longer up to date. If you forget to save it, if you forget to re-upload it to the server or anything like that, it's very difficult to make sure that information is current. And then data is just data, right? If it's not giving you the analytics or it's not coded to a way that it's giving you risk profiles on your drivers or on your company as a whole, it's just numbers. It's just data. It's not really helping you do much. You want to make sure you're audit ready all year. And how do you do that? Keep your files clean and centralized, preferably digital. I know there's a lot of people who are still utilizing a paper system. I recommend, migrating that to whether it's a online system or like a server base, but getting that all centralized, cleaned, and organized. So you're not having to deal with any fire drills when DOT shows up. You're compliant before the notice of audit, and then also just the visibility across terminals. You want to make sure that your Texas terminal who is getting audited doesn't have to phone California where everything is housed, and now you have to scan and download or ship or try to get all the data over to Texas within 24 48 hours. You want to implement a checks and balance system. So whether that's if you're using paper, a check sheet of some sort, an internal audit of some sort, or if you're utilizing a program or software, make sure it's telling you what's missing, so you know what needs to get done to get that driver compliant. This also helps with your due diligence benefits. When an auditor comes in and historically maybe a company hasn't been doing what they need to do for DOT, but you can show that now you've made those changes, you have due diligence, they tend to be a little bit more lenient with you. Bonus is implement an auditor experience. A happy auditor is good results. We want to make sure that the auditor, when they come in or you send them the files or however you are communicating with that auditor, that it's smooth, they're happy, they're content, and that they're not getting frustrated having to go back and forth with you. Driver visibility and engagement. So at the end of the day, the drivers are the ones who can go get their medical card renewed. They're the ones who can go get their driver's license renewed. They're the ones who are operating the vehicle, right? So you want to make sure that the driver visibility and engagement is there to make sure that they are bought in. So give driver access to their own portal if you're using a system of some sort. Driver checks their license status on their phone. They get reminders automated through their system where they can go in and upload directly from their phone. Builds accountability and builds transparency. It helps, helping them, remind them that they need to take care of these credentials, does a lot for the driver. And then encourage driver feedback. If you just implement things, implement, and you never ask for the feedback of your drivers, they're the ones who are going to be utilizing a system. If you're implementing like a camera or something like that, you want to make sure you're getting their feedback so they feel heard, they feel involved, and typically implementations go a little bit smoother in that way. Document retention and purging. So know the FMCSA retention rules. So 3 years for applications, MVRs, etc., like that. Why is it matters? It's a DOT regulation. Have your onboarding only files. So those files that are required for onboarding, either separated in the driver file or marked somehow in your platform to show that you have a clear initiative of safety and risk protocol from the very beginning. And also just for retention purposes. Avoid keeping expired or unnecessary files. If you keep them out of the initial driver file but hold on to them internally for some reason, you can always show them for audit purposes, but sometimes more information isn't always good. You want to make sure that the auditor has what they need, has only what they need, and typically, that helps alleviate any kind of additional digging. So these are all great habits, right? And you can implement a lot of them today. It's a lot, so we'll go over picking a few out here, the ones that I think are most important to kind of take a look at today. But how do you make sure that long-term compliance or that compliance strategy is long term? So we want to move beyond habits and we want to build culture and a sustainable strategy. So these are the main people or people involved with compliance. So your leadership, your safety and compliance, your HR, your dispatch, and your drivers. So you want to align the compliance with overall safety program, DVIRs, hours of service, drug and alcohol, etc. This is going to touch everything that has to do with your safety and compliance. So what are the steps? Review, measure, adjust, and train. This is going to be the continuous improvement cycle. So review, what are you currently tracking? Are you currently tracking anything? How are you currently tracking it? What are the biggest pain points this second? Try to narrow it down to 3 or try to work with an expert. Sometimes when you are so involved and put into the scenario, it's hard to see where the gaps are. So asking a consultant or asking someone that you trust to help audit your files will help kind of open up some gaps that might not be there. And then we want to measure number of expired or missing drivers versus active documents. What is the average time to onboard a driver? What are the number of violations per year per driver? You want to make sure that you have a number to start with, so you have a starting point and you can only go up from there. So just reviewing and saying, yeah, I have some documents missing. Yeah, I have some drivers who probably shouldn't be on the road anymore. No. You need clear, concise numbers so you know where you started and where you're about to head. Then you want to adjust. So update your workflows and your procedures and then implement new solutions. And then lastly, train. You want to make sure that everyone's on the same page and has the same page, same results. You want to maybe implement monthly, weekly, quarterly meetings with the departments to make sure that everything that you have discovered through your audit is being implemented well, is being taken well, and that everyone's on the same page. All 5 departments need to be informed, they need to understand, and they need to commit to executing the changes. So if you go tell, your maintenance, your maintenance team, like, hey, we are having a lot of issues with tires being deflated or whatever the situation is, right? And they go, great. And then you guys don't have a discussion on what needs to happen or what the change is. They don't fully understand. So they've been informed, but they do not understand what is happening, what needs to change. And then say you do have that conversation and they just go, I don't care about it. They're not committed to executing those changes. So all that hard work that you just did to try to figure out what the problem is, implement a change, is not going to go very well because the person who is in charge of that change ultimately just isn't going to execute it. So you want to make sure that everyone is doing those 3 steps. And then what? You want to review, measure, adjust, and train again, right? This is not going to be just a one-time thing. You're going to have to consistently make sure that problems are being looked at, they're being measured, adjust as needed, and train as needed. So really the big 3 issues, over what we talked about is lack of communication and visibility between departments, or they're using a manual or non-digital system, and there's no source of truth. These are the 3 things that can really hinder a workflow and hinder your compliance, visibility, and your safety initiative. So if I were to focus on 4 things to do today, leaving this webinar, or maybe you're already doing this, right, is to ensure that you have a cohesive and centralized database. So make sure that whatever you're utilizing is giving you the data that you need. It has all the data that you need, and it's working well where it needs to. I highly suggest going and looking for continuous license monitoring. It is fairly inexpensive. If you are not currently already enrolled in continuous license monitoring, DQM Connect does offer that through our platform. Or, if you're already enrolled, that's great. Find a training program that sticks. This is a big one. There are tons of LMS systems out there. There's tons of people who provide training. But if it's just here, read this document, take a small, short little test, and then move on, is the training really doing what it needs to do? So find a program that utilizes good training behaviors and is really going to actually stick with your drivers when you implement the training. And then have a strict onboarding procedure. This is, when you onboard the driver, that's the first interaction. The application is the first piece of paper that you will have on that driver. So you want to make sure that it's compliant from the beginning. That's going to set the tone. So if you don't have a strict onboarding procedure, you are unsure if there are any gaps, go back, look at your application, look at the way that you're hiring, make sure that all departments who are involved in hiring are following the protocol, because that is the first step to compliance and safety. So there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of tools out there that can help streamline your compliance. Some things you want to look at is, if you choose to implement technology, it needs to take away the challenge of manual systems. You shouldn't have any lost paperwork. You shouldn't have to deal with like spreadsheet errors or data errors. You should see an increase of visibility, and you want to make sure that you're not just having a bunch of junk data in there. You also want to make sure that the technology that you're implementing has benefits of automation. So renewal notifications. It's a centralized database with a single source of truth. Instant file retrieval for audits. Mobile-friendly driver interactions. And then also your integrations matter. You want to be integrated with MVR monitoring systems so you don't have to bounce between multiple different platforms. You want to be integrated with your drug and alcohol background check providers so that you can very easily order and review right in the same system. Again, not having to sign into secure email, not having to go into it, sign into a different platform. Being in one cohesive platform really helps with not missing steps and the review process. And then also just your safety and training platform. So if you utilize cameras, if you have to utilize an ELD, any kind of data that is going to flow in for safety purposes, like cell phone tracking apps and stuff like that. See if it's implemented into the technology that you're currently using or the technology that you're looking at, because that's going to help, get everything in one place with minimizing that data entry. So there's a tons of free tools that we have built. We're gonna send out this slide deck so you don't have to remember any of these or try to take a screenshot or anything like that. But there's tons of free tools out there. We have compliance trainings that we've built with Luma Learning that go over, onboarding, DOT, DQ files, one-on-ones. They're super short, super fun. So if you just want to brush up on your DOT compliance for driver files, feel free to take those. We also do have a risk calculator as well. So if you want to see if you have any gaps potentially in your driver file management, please feel free to take that as well. We do monthly educational webinars. You can view all the past ones on our website as well as blogs. And then we do have free resource downloads as well, anywhere from, quarterly, monthly itinerary for driver check-in meetings, finding the right ELD, finding the right camera system for you, tons of things that can be very helpful. Think I saw a few questions come in. And I'll let Emily kind of sift through those.
Yep. Yeah, so a couple of questions. When a driver's CDL is renewed, is it necessary to run an MVR? I understand it's not required by regulations, but what would you recommend as best practice?
So you don't need to run an MVR for a license renewal. Now you should be getting a copy of that updated license and, tracking their additional renewal, the next renewal date, but you don't need an MVR. For just to kind of bounce off of that, for the new medical card initiative that's coming, you will need to run an MVR when they have that renewed medical card, especially they're going digital, but you will need to run that MVR for medical card, not for the driver's license.
Perfect, thank you. Another question regarding continuous monitoring.
Yeah.
Any ideas on how to close the gap we're finding in our continuous monitoring program? We have had violations that were missed due to various reasons. Sometimes we have not been given an explanation as to why we weren't alerted despite the driver being enrolled in the program. And then we've had one where it wasn't reported out as that state doesn't report out-of-state violations for these sort of alerts.
Okay. Depending on who you're utilizing for monitoring, that might be a little bit of a deeper dive into who you're using, what their current workflow is. I do know that, that some states will report, it's kind of different timelines of when they're reporting, or they won't report the out of state, that is an issue. I would, I'd like to kind of deep dive a little bit more into who you're currently using, and see if there's some gaps that we can look at together. But I'm trying to think if there's something off the top of my head that could help without knowing a little bit information. But yeah, I think I would need to know a little bit more.
Okay, and the person that asked that question, if they want to email, I can turn my camera on, just email Emily at Iowa Motor Truck or give us a call and we can connect you with Emily too. So you guys can work on that question. The next question, is there a way to receive an email, text, or other notification whenever a roadside inspection occurs, or if a driver receives a violation, especially if the driver does not provide us with that information on the same day?
I'm not aware of anything directly from like the CSA, but going back to continuous monitoring, I know if you're in continuous monitoring, it's for license, and you can actually get set up for CSA monitoring as well, so it will track your CSA score. Depending on if you're enrolled, who you're enrolled with, that the notification can be different depending on the program you're using. With DQM in particular, we send an alert to the DQM dashboard and it lights up, there's triangles that, hey, you need to pay attention to that. But it really depends on the system you're using. I don't think there's anything direct from like FMCSA though, as of now. That'd be a really cool thing though.
And that might be a question too for your state trucking associate, depending what state you're in, what they're doing. But next question. Are we supposed to pull MVRs when our drivers renew their medical examiner certificate, since we are no longer getting the certificates? Just wondering how we're supposed to do this.
Yeah, so I kind of touched on that a little bit. Yes, the new regulation, which it's been pushed till January now, but the new regulation is that you will need to run an MVR after the medical card has been renewed. I highly recommend telling your drivers though to ask for a paper medical card still. There is nothing that says that the testing center will not give you a paper medical card, because we all know, I mean, if you were in the trenches with clearinghouse like I was, setting up a bunch of accounts, that their things just don't go very smoothly. So I would recommend you know having your drivers ask for a paper copy, just so that you have proof for whatever reason, but you will need to run that MVR. And that's why having, a system that's integrated with your CRA or your provider who runs your MVRs for you is really helpful, because you can do it all from one system. You don't have to remember to go back and order from, whoever you're utilizing.
Perfect. Okay, next one here. This one just came in, so I haven't read it yet. We understand that after a driver is hired and all pre-employment checks are completed, we need to obtain the preceding 7 days time on duty form. I'd like to know the retention period on this form, date of the driver's last employment plus 3 years or only 6 months to the date when I get it signed, and whether it is mandatory.
So, yes, you do have to have the record of duty status kept to show that there wasn't a violation for hours of service. I don't know off the top of my head about the retention of that. I know most things are at least 3 years, but I don't know off the top of my head if it's considered a pre-employment document fully. It needs to be retained for the full life cycle of that driver. I'll have to look that up and get back to you.
Okay, and here's another one about that as well. 3-year retention of employment application question. Do we have our driver fill out a new one every 3 years then, or are they no longer necessary in the DQF? Did I misunderstand that?
No, so if it's considered a pre-employment document, so application, that very first license, that very first pre-employment MVR, all that drug and alcohol, the very first drug and alcohol testing, you want to make sure that you're keeping that on file, because it's showing that you are onboarding properly. Everything after that, everything, like, so if they get pulled for a random or something, drug and alcohol test, and then they get pulled for a random again, those ones after that initial testing can be under that 3 retention rule, but you want to keep those pre-employment documents for the full time that driver is employed. They do not need to fill out a new application every 3 years, but you just want to keep that one on file.
Perfect.